Welcome to The Business. I'm Lanre, Akinola, and on this show we break down business and its impact on Africa and Africans. Business affects every one of us, whoever we are, wherever we are. In the news this week, Russia and the African Union plan their first joint summit next year as Moscow's strategic interest in Africa grows. IHS Towers, Africa's biggest mobile phone tower company, becomes the latest operator in the sector to postpone a major public listing. In this week's big story, Dubai-based Abraj, a leading emerging markets private equity investor, sells its Africa business amid allegations of mismanaged funds. A blow to African private equity? And in this week's breakdown, Nigeria has the dubious distinction of overtaking India for the highest number of people living in extreme poverty. Joining me throughout for commentary and insight is business reporter David Thomas. And in part two, I'll be talking to Obi Asika, creative industries entrepreneur and founder of Lagos-based strategic communications company Dragon Africa. Russia is planning its first major joint summit with the African Union next year. The aim is to raise its diplomatic and economic profile on the continent. David, interesting trend here. We've seen Russia take more of a proactive approach to Africa in recent months. This is the first time they're putting together a big summit. Other countries have this kind of platform already. China has its own platform. India has its own platform. Russia is a bit late to the game. What's behind this?
Sure. So I think until now, Russia's been relatively disengaged with the continent. It had historic ties with Africa going back to the Cold War, but perhaps in the Putin era, they haven't really pushed forward with those business and economic ties. And I think given that Russia is now looking to assert itself on the global stage, it's looking to build more links with African countries, and the summit next year, a Russian-African Union summit, will be a good start towards that goal.
It's a continuation of a trend we've seen for the last 15 years or so, where Africa's international relationships are moving on, they're evolving, they're diversifying. It's got to be good news, potentially quite a nice opportunity here for more trade between the two.
Absolutely, and I think Russia does have areas in which Africa would like to cooperate, one of which is nuclear power. Russia's obviously a world leader in nuclear energy, and a lot of African countries are looking to increase the power on their grids. And also areas such as mining as well, diamond and platinum mining. The Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has actually been in Zimbabwe talking up those kind of deals.
It'll be interesting to see where this one goes. Other than energy, other than mining, any other sectors here that might be relevant?
I think defence is another one. Lavrov was, when he was in Zimbabwe, is talking up the potential for military cooperation. And obviously Russia has a traditionally very strong defence sector. I think one of the problems with all these sectors is that Russia's actually under sanctions from the US and Europe, which complicates doing deals with third countries like African countries.
Moscow in Africa, space to watch. Nigeria's IHS Towers is postponing a planned listing that would have valued the company at up to $10 billion. It's not the first to do so this year. David, we've seen quite a few towers companies. So towers company is one of the big success stories in the ICT sector over the last 10 or 15 years across Africa. IHS is the latest to ditch a planned IPO this year. Helios Towers did the same, and I think Eaton Towers did the same thing. On the surface, doesn't sound like good news, but the fact that we're here talking about multi-billion-dollar listings is a reflection of just how successful this sector has been.
Sure. And it's definitely an increasing market across Africa as more and more citizens embrace mobile technology. There's a greater need for data. Countries are embracing 3G and 4G technologies. And so, broadly speaking, the mobile infrastructure market is a huge one, and one that's likely to expand into the future.
Yeah, and these companies know it because the analysis suggests that the reason they've pulled these IPOs is because they think they can get more money, right? So they're waiting for even better valuations.
Yeah, and I think analysts are suggesting that companies could actually acquire more smaller operators and build their profile before they actually go to the IPO. So I think we may see a delay for now, but it's likely that these companies in the future are going to seek out huge investments. And I mean, IHS has got some serious backing from Goldman Sachs and MTN.
Yeah.
So we know that there's serious money in the sector.
Expect more to come from Africa's mobile industry. Now for a big story, one of Africa's leading private equity investors, the Dubai-based Abraj Group, has sold its African business amid allegations of misusing investor funds. David, this is the latest knock that private equity in Africa has seen in recent months. It was once perhaps the most glamorous aspect of investing in Africa. It's had a tough couple of years. We've seen a number of big international players really fail to realize the opportunity. KKR has pulled out. TPG's investment on the continent hasn't really worked out. Carlyle is struggling. Now Abraj is selling up. Yeah, probably not by their own choice, but is this bad news for private equity?
I think, again, the longer-term fundamentals are probably there for private equity in Africa, but it's certainly concerning for Abraj, which is one of the kind of darlings of the private equity space, based out of Dubai. They're investing in a lot of African startups, but I think the problem there is that they've been accused of mismanagement of funds by some pretty high-profile backers, including
the Gates
Foundation and the International Finance Corporation. And I think that's going to be particularly difficult for them going forwards. And as a result, they've had to offload their emerging market funds, including their Africa fund, for about $250 million.
Do you think this is going to hurt the industry?
I think in the short term, yes, because investors will wonder how well their money is being managed, especially if firms are seen to be combining clients' money with their own money, which is a definite no-no when it comes to private equity. And I think investors will be a lot more discerning about which vehicles they put money in.
Could we expect to maybe see local funds become more important now, more significant now? This is bad news. It's it's not good for the headlines, and perhaps the international private equity play hasn't really worked out. But it's not like there aren't funds active on the continent. Some of them are quite big as well.
Sure, I think there will be increasing opportunities for locally based funds. The reality is that African business needs capital, it needs investment, and small companies everywhere are looking for money. And that's only going to increase, the need for private equity, whether it's out of Nairobi or Johannesburg. And maybe in the future, when we look back, Abraj will not seem like such a player in comparison.
It's not the end of private equity in Africa, but uncertain times ahead. In this week's breakdown, we look at Africa's inclusive growth challenge. According to estimates, Nigeria has overtaken India with the most people globally living in extreme poverty. This despite having just 14% of its population. David, this is an astonishing statistic if it's even remotely accurate. What we're being told is that Nigeria is home to 87 million people who live in extreme poverty, which is the highest in the world, even higher than India. This despite, over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a lot of growth. We've seen booming investment into Nigeria and other parts of Africa. What's going on here? How can poverty be going up when growth and investment are going up?
Yeah, it's certainly a depressing read. I mean, to suggest that 87 million people in poverty essentially means that those 87 million earn less than $1.90 a day. And this places Nigeria below India. And I think the real problem here is broad-based growth in Africa. While we've seen GDP increase over the last few years, that hasn't been shared by the population at large, and especially in a country, Nigeria, which is so dependent on extractive industries, which essentially, encourage a kind of oligarchic model of business. You're never going to see broad-based growth.
And as you rightly say, this is not a Nigerian problem. This is an issue that observers have been aware of across Africa for a while. And the UN just this week issued a warning in Ghana saying that millions of people are being left out of an economic boom there, with private investment projects taking precedent over investment into social services and critical infrastructure and things like that. So this issue of inclusive growth, it's understood, it has been understood for some time. Why is nothing changing? Why is nothing being done about this? What needs to be done?
I think one thing that African governments should do is prioritise broadening the tax base, because there are an increasing number of wealthy Africans, but they're not paying the taxes that they ought to be. And I think that means that there's less money for social services, there's less money for education, and there's less money for all the kind of long-term investments that governments need to improve the lot of their citizens, essentially.
And what's worrying is that we have these very powerful demographic trends. Africa's urban population is expected to double by 2050. We know that 60% of all Africans are under the age of 25. In some countries that goes up to 70 or 80%, huge demographic pressure. So do governments understand the urgency here and the need to really tackle structural reforms?
I don't think so at the moment, because there's been talk for years of diversifying Africa's economies. We seem to come back to this almost after every single commodity boom, the idea that growth should be broader and not just relegated to a few sectors of the economy. But we seem to go around in circles, and we're here again. And I think if this message hasn't sunk in by now, you do wonder if it ever will, especially with that worrying population growth that you're talking about.
David, thank you very much for all the insight today. Join me in part 2 when I'll be talking to Obi Asika, creative industries entrepreneur and founder of Lagos-based strategic communications company Dragon Africa. Welcome back to The Business, the show where we break down business and its impact on Africa and Africans. I'm Lanre Akinola. I'm delighted to be joined by Obi Asika, creative industries entrepreneur and founder and chairman of Lagos-based strategic communications company Dragon Africa. Obi, thank you so much for joining me on The Business. African creative industries and Nigeria in particular are all the rage at the moment. We've seen the Black Panther phenomenon. We've seen the Nigerian football jersey frenzy. It's been a smash hit all around the world. We've seen the rise of Afrobeat. Lai Mohammed, the Minister of Communications, has gone as far as calling the creative industries the new oil for Nigeria. What do you make of that?
We thank the minister for that. I mean, some of us have been in this thing for like 15 years, trying to drive what I call the soft power of Nigeria. And I think the soft power of Nigeria first took Africa. Now it's beginning to take the world. And it's all about engaging with the lifestyle, the culture. And it comes from a sense, from the attitude. Okay, and that attitude is an attitude of, we will win, we can win, yeah? And I think Black Panther, which is an incredible movie, I mean, I just came out of Russia from the World Cup, and they were trying to get this kit off our bodies. I don't even have the kit, but one of my friends had the tracksuit bottom. I mean, on the flight in, on the flight out, everywhere, people want the Nigeria. And I think it just shows you. Nike just put in some buzz marketing and linked the football back to the lifestyle culture of our music and fashion, and bang. So obviously, it's important for people to understand that if Nike sold 3 million shirts, for example, that's 180 million pounds, right? That just shows you the value, repressed value that we have all been sitting on and not focusing on and not investing in.
So why is it starting to come through now? You said you've been at this for quite a while, long before it was the sexy industry that it is now. What's it taken to get to this point?
Well, so a whole bunch of things. First of all, I think you have to stop the self-hate. Africans used to self-hate all the time. They wouldn't listen to their own music. They wouldn't wear their own clothes. They wouldn't drink their own drink. They wouldn't eat their own food. However, that has changed. I think every African girl around the world is wearing African designers, African fabrics and colors. We're eating the food. We have the jollof wars. So the culture has changed. The self-confidence is there. So people understand that there's value in who you are and what you do and what you bring to the table. And once you see value in yourself, then you no longer have that issue. I think that's the most important thing that changed.
Is Africa reaping the benefits of this? Because yes, we have these outstanding cases of success, the whiz kids of this world. The Jason Njokus who
Iroko doing incredibly well.
We've got these standard successes. How representative are they of the systemic structural change in the industry? Are we seeing the emergence of a broader industry, or are they actual exceptions?
Well, they're baby steps. These are outliers, right? But at the end of the day, what you see is this: Wizkid didn't just happen. He came out of a process to an extent. There was a bunch of independent labels, mine involved, many of them in Lagos maybe 10 years ago, and he was moving around. My office, a bunch of other offices and studios, and then he got through the system with Banky W and a bunch of other guys, and now he's where he's at. Davido, the same thing. But I think what you'll find is that we need to build a stronger companies, right? Jason's doing it the right way. Quite a few others are as well. He's actually managed to raise a significant amount of cap, I think about 40 million, which is important because people need to understand and need to see that there is money in the space. Look at Nigeria. no matter what the population is, whether it's 150 million or 200 million, it's a lot of people. And our average age of our country is about 17. So we are a youth-centric market. Every advertising company in Nigeria will talk to you about youth marketing, right? But unfortunately, most of the time, they're talking at the consumer, not with the consumer. So we have to change some of those conversations, but the opportunities are enormous.
Now, we've seen some of these successes come through. Nigeria, despite this, it's a very tough environment for any entrepreneur.
Definitely.
I mean, even if you have the money, it's an extremely difficult
It's
environment.
tough.
What needs to happen to make it, I mean, not necessarily easier, but just make it more viable for these companies to come through? As you rightly say, we need to build better companies, bigger companies.
Well, I think a lot of stuff has happened between what the Bank of Industry is doing and some of those initiatives that the federal government is supporting. There are beginning to be accesses to development funds. What we haven't seen is the retail banks being able to enable equity. Right? There's debt finance available, but equity is very hard to find. So I think that what we have is a situation where very few of the bankers understand content, very few of them understand media, and they take it for granted. Same thing with the politicians. But guess what? The minute they need to look for power, they come straight to media. The minute they get power, they abandon media. Then they wonder why they lose power. So for me, it's always, it doesn't make any sense. If you have no media, you have no voice, therefore you have no power. And the truth of the matter is there are no strong, really strong, very few, very strong media companies owned by black people anywhere in the world, and that's bad.
So how do you make the case when you're talking to industry leaders, when you're talking to people in government, you work in with the public and private sectors, how do you make the case for media, you know? Because it sounds like there's a lot of educating that needs to be done.
Well, I think the thing is, the first things first is I don't like the sort of cap-in-hand approach. A lot of people who are talent want to go and beg government, help us. No, don't help us. Create an enabling environment, right? Give waivers for people in this space. Enable and secure contracts. Set the film co-production treaties in place. Enable business to flow. Let's stop this whole thing like you're doing people a favor. You're not doing people a favor. You're enabling people to create more wealth. And that, I think, is a mind shift that needs to happen both for operators in the sector and for government who's trying to support the sector. And when you begin to have that conversation and begin to take it beyond the specific government at the time to a strategic approach to the sector, then I think you see much more happening.
What's your prognosis for the next few years in this space? Be it entertainment media, be it news media, whatever it might be. We can anticipate growth, I imagine. What needs to happen to make sure that we're getting the full potential here?
Well, I mean, like you took a segmentation. Let's look at it, for example, now. Nollywood, for example. Nigeria only has 35, 36 cinemas, so we have 150 screens. It's important to get to 1,000 screens as soon as possible. I would like to see us get back to the 1978 level, 13,000 screens. With 13,000 screens, we have the possibility to have a $4 billion Nollywood industry by itself, right? If we build venues for live events, we can build a touring circuit in Nigeria that is worth billions. The reason why Davido, Wizkid, and Flavor and all these guys are touring all the time, because they can't tour in their own country. There's no other reason. Why would you be on the plane if you can do it in Lagos? The crowd is right there in Lagos. So we've got to build the assets and the facilities and change the culture to grow the assets. News media has been news has been completely disrupted. Print is disrupted. You know, the bloggers have disrupted the newspapers. And some of these guys need to work out how to reinvent themselves. And I think that key programming is going to be the most important thing for news media. Current affairs, proper programming that's in-depth, not superficial, will always cut through. But how you distribute it has to change.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to see that news media has this influence. It's seen as this really powerful tool, but it really is struggling to attract any money. And
viewers.
You're quite right. I mean, the model is simply broken. It's simply not there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And one of the reasons it's being disrupted is social media. And one of the platforms that you've built is Social Media Week, Lagos, which is the biggest social media event in Africa. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Definitely.
What's the role of social media in all this? How has social media helped drive creative industries along? How do you think it's going to continue to reshape the media sector in general?
Well, you know, social media affects everything, right? And, you know, when we started 7 years ago doing Social Media Week Lagos, people thought it was a joke. You want me to come and discuss how to use WhatsApp? I said, no. It's about new media and how technology applies to your life in a connected environment. And what you suddenly work out now today is obvious to all of us, that whether it's your healthcare, whether it's your sports, whether it's your news consumption, it's all social media and it's all on the phone. Now, you know, 10 years ago, the Europeans used to say that mobile was the third device, the third screen. We Africans always knew it was the first screen yes. Because that's where we have. So in Nigeria, you have 150 million mobile devices, less than 40 million televisions. So go mobile first as a clear strategy for the African continent. And the other thing is you've got to be talking to your people and engaging with them. Africans chat all the time. They're on every platform talking, but there's a lack of aggregation and a lack of monetization. So we're creating content, we have access, and social media has enabled access that didn't exist before for creators.
You used the key word there, monetization. How do you stop Google and Facebook taking all the money? Because certainly in the news industry, this has been the case. Like, there's been no shortage of effort to try and monetize social media, but it's much easier said than done.
It's very difficult. I think the key thing you have to do with Google and Facebook is play them at their own game. You use their platforms to build your platform, but you enable yourself to stand alone and be able to also earn. I mean, Ruko did that very well, and many others are following the same way. I mean, one of our chaps has built one of the largest, he's African, I'm not going to say his name, but he's built, literally, he's doing about 3 billion views a year on Facebook. And he's a Nigerian, he's based out of London. Very proud of him. I think in the next few months, the world will begin to learn more about him. There are many like that, and I think it's really about how people are beginning to use these things. Look at the hair and beauty channels on YouTube. All these black people with their black hair and beauty. These things are driving billions of dollars of commerce. What we need to really figure out is how do we bring some of that money back into our ecosystem? So if you're a creator and you're influencing all these people, how are you getting paid?
And we're almost out of time. Very quickly, I want to pick up on that point. What are you going to do in the next few years to make sure this happens? Because this is, I mean, you eat, sleep, breathe this stuff.
If I give away all the secrets, I would make the money.
What's your vision over the next 3 to 5 years? What needs to happen? How, where's Africa going to be?
I think this is that moment for us as Africans. I think we have the moment now. It's not in 3 to 5 years, it's now today. And it's about coalescing and building bridges. And then once you come together and stop pushing apart the Caribbean, the North Americans, everybody, blacks, all Africans, together, one movement, global.
Obi, what a wonderful note to end the discussion on. Thank you so much for joining me on The Business today. That's all we have time for. Thank you for watching The Business, and please join us again next time.